Hello, my name is Jim Vieira. I wanted to speak today about a strange mystery that I stumbled across many years ago about the possibility of giants existing in ancient America. The way I got to this place that kind of turned my life upside down was just searching through town and county histories here in Massachusetts, looking at old accounts of stonework as I investigated the possibility of Native Americans building with stone in New England. And what I then encountered while searching these old documents, these old town and county histories and archaeological records, was an enormous amount of giant skeletons that were reported and measured by respected scientists and professionals at the time, along with farmers and other lay people. I ended up getting a real stiff lesson in agendas and egos and basically orientations around skeptics and the way they think about the world and the way they think about their research and the way they think about paradigms. And from my vantage point, I like to share interesting information. I like to go to sources like native wisdom, oral traditions, esoteric sources, and religious documents to piece together a comparative analysis of the past, rather than just relying on anthropology, archaeology, and sciences that were built upon a lot of racist ideas in the late 1800s that were conjured, I would say, almost out of thin air based on Darwin's view of evolution and racist paradigms about the lack of sophistication, supposedly, of indigenous peoples. So I just come from a different place. You have people that it just rings true, these kind of strange and controversial ideas, and then others will never get it and never want to get it and are more interested in protecting what they think about the past or philosophies or science that they've studied for decades and gained tenure through or wrote about. And I'd rather be much more open-minded and flexible in my pursuit of truth and knowledge. And quite frankly, I think our entire Western system is built on a house of sand. You know, the idea that the Big Bang occurred and then ammonia was hit by lightning or however life occurred, and then we developed as a species and then gained this incredible consciousness. And I just believe there's a holographic nature to reality that quantum physicists and the mystics tell us about that tells a different story. So I don't want to try to make myself right by making anybody else wrong. I just want to offer what I hope are open-minded ideas about these controversial subjects that are pervasive all throughout history, all throughout the globe, and all throughout different kinds of medium, all documents and secret society literature and esoteric sources and oral traditions. So hopefully you'll see this for what it is, just an attempt to be open-minded about something that is considered extremely controversial. So I started my pursuit of investigating these old accounts, and along with my brother and I and my co-author Hugh Newman, we had a show on the History Channel, Search for the Lost Giants. I've since done several documentaries on the lost colony of Roanoke, and I appeared on Josh Gates's Expedition Unknown Travel Channel show, and I recently was on with Megan Fox on her show about called Legends of the Lost, talking about the idea of giants in ancient America. So I've co-authored a book with Hugh Newman, basically going through hundreds of these accounts, just trying to lay out a case that maybe, much like the Clovis Barrier and out of Africa and the Younger Dryas impact theory, these new ideas that upend modern theories about the past, maybe the idea of giants has something to it, and maybe there is evidence hidden in plain sight in these old archaeological reports. One of the big criticisms is like, show me the bones, show me, all the evidence. And I would say, I think we've made a strong case that there is an anthropological mystery here. 7 and 8 foot skeletons verified by academic professionals over a long span of time that basically tell a different story, that maybe there were lost continents and maybe there were survivors that showed up in these different places like in the United States that native people tell us about. And maybe deeper into the Pleistocene age, 20, 50,000 years ago, maybe they were the giants talked about in biblical texts and oral traditions that They were characterized as malevolent, cannibalistic, and at the same time as bringers of truth and wisdom, as ancient geomancers and sowers of thunder. So you have these two stories going on about the past. And once again, there's a lot of new science coming down the pipe that really is telling us a different story. So I'm just open to this idea. I don't want to twist anybody's arm or try to overprove my case. I'll let the viewer decide what they think about this whole story. Now, one of my inspirations in researching this story is Vine Deloria, Lakota elder, who organized a conference in the late 1990s in Washington State, where he gathered Native elders from around the country to share the wisdom of their tribes. And very surprisingly, all the Native elders had stories of little people and giants. And there are tribes all around the United States that have this folklore, the mythology, or oral traditions about giants existing and Native tribes warring with them in the past. And Deloria was harshly critical of Western science, and I'll give you some good reasons, racist-based orientations that he spoke of, but this is one of the passages from his book. Modern-day archaeology and anthropology have nearly sealed the door on our imaginations, broadly interpreting the North American past as devoid of anything unusual in the way of great cultures characterized by a people of unusual demeanor. And you will see shortly that there was anything but an uninspired culture that lived here. You'll see that Native peoples were very sophisticated, but the white settlers who showed up had a different version of events. And this is John Wesley Powell, the first head of Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology. And he led the Eastern Mounds Division that unearthed many of these ancient burial sites that had never been touched, obviously by Native peoples, until the white colonists showed up and dug into them for curiosity's sake, to plow lands, to build structures, to relic hunt. So Powell was basically oriented around, a lot of the white racist ideas at the time. And he wrote an article in the American Anthropologist, From Barbarism to Civilization. And he was a student of Lewis Henry Morgan, who wrote Ancient Society in 1877. So according to Morgan, human history was divided into three ethnical periods: savagery, barbarism, and civilization. Now, ancient cultures, indigenous cultures were savage and barbaric, and the white Western world was the civilized world to all these early academics. In July of 1912, the threat of inferior races polluting the Western body politic was discussed at the First International Congress of Eugenics in London. Sitting in the audience were Britain's Prime Minister Lord Balfour, Winston Churchill, and Charles Darwin's son Leonard, along with the ambassadors of Greece, France, and Norway. One of the dirtiest realities of the American eugenics movement is that, with relatively few prominent exceptions, it is difficult to find a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant man or woman of means who did not endorse such theories. Now, Teddy Roosevelt is considered this great pioneer and this hero of American history, but there's another side to these stories back then, and this is one of his quotes. "We need not waste our time in dealing with any sentimentalist who believes that, on account of any abstract principle, it would have been right to leave this continent to the domain, to the hunting ground of squalid savages." Now, that was the belief that natives were disorganized and savage and had nothing in the way of arts and scientists or nothing to teach the Western world. In 1951, in the book The History of the Indians of Connecticut, John DeForest writes, "They were living a barbarous race in the midst of a civilized community. Consequently, when they were attacked by the diseases and vices of civilization, they had nothing to oppose them but their ancient ignorance and simplicity." This was these rationales for Western expansion, for manifest destiny, for racist genocide, if you will, were promulgated continuously in the press and the academic media from the most upstanding citizens in the white community, that these savage Indians were too unsophisticated and they brought this misery upon themselves. So that is the fertile ground where all these theories were created in the late 1800s, and a lot of them still stick. Now, I'm not painting modern-day anthropologists and archaeologists with this brush. In fact, I find them very open-minded and progressive as far as being respectful of native traditions and native peoples, but not so in the realm of believing that oral tradition has any place. So native tribes for 10,000 years, in fact, oral traditions, indigenous wisdom all around the planet, at least 10,000 years of it was thrown away as a means to make a scientific argument. In fact, it was basically marginalized. So we went in, we stole this land. I didn't do it, but you know, the Anglo-Saxon mindset displaced native peoples, brought chaos to their cultures, and then started from scratch and didn't listen to the people who lived there for 10,000 years, who told us stories of little people and giants and great floods, and you know, had a different, interesting mythological tale to tell that has been verified by science more and more these days. So were native people ignorant and savage and unsophisticated? You know, absolutely not. And this is kind of a tell. The giant story is woven in the story of native civilizations. When I was in school, when most of us were in school, we didn't hear any of this. We didn't learn about the mound building cultures. We didn't learn about the Anasazi and the incredible Pueblo ruins in the West. We in fact learned the opposite, and it was basically an unremarkable tale of that started when Columbus showed up. That's the way I was taught anyways. So the mound builders represented three different cultures, the Adena, the Hopewell, and the Mississippian, that spanned from about 1000 BC to 1500 AD. These three separate Eastern civilizations who created incredible works of earth and stone, which I'll show you. The earliest was at Watson Break in Louisiana, the earliest mound site that dated to 3400 BC. So a rather distant age. They're not really associated with the Adena people, the mound builders that started up around 1000 or 500 BC, but there was mound building activity that went back deep into antiquity. And here's a map right here of the mound builders around the time the Olmecs, 1500 BC, the precursor to the Mayan, very sophisticated culture. And in 1500 BC, at Poverty Point, Louisiana, was created this massive earthwork that was right on the Arkansas River. Now, the embankments here would have filled the Great Pyramid of Egypt 36 times. And that bird effigy right there was the centerpiece of the ceremonial complex. And it was 600 feet by 700 feet by 72 feet high. And new testing revealed that this entire complex was probably built between 3 and 6 months it took to complete. So a rapid creation, and there's astronomical alignments, a wood henge at the site, and it's dated to 1500 BC. In fact, I think it was 1938 that an Army satellite image revealed the site that wasn't known about. Now, the mound builders built well over 100,000 earthen mounds and geometric forms. This one is at Miamisburg in Ohio. Just really extraordinary works of art and engineering feats. This is at Aztalan in Wisconsin. Here's an aerial shot. Here is Grave Creek. And at Grave Creek, they found an interesting Grave Creek tablet that was copied and acknowledged and then lost. There was some controversy about it because it seems to appear to have some kind of European or Middle Eastern script on it. But what was found and documented was a 7'4" female skeleton and an over 8-foot male skeleton in 1838. There was a stone arch also found in it. You know, what was happening at the time is you had like relic hunters and profiteers digging in these mounds. It wasn't standard science like you have today. But the point I will make with a lot of these accounts is basically just a standard measurement of a stationary object. You know, if you have a 28-inch femur bone, it's pretty straightforward. Now my co-author and I, Hugh Newman, have revealed hoaxes, faulty regression formulas, incompetence. All the accounts I'm going to show you, I'm not saying every one is I stand behind by any means, but there are so many accounts of 7 and 8 foot taller skeletons and taller skeletons that are basically measured by professionals of the time, that it's kind of tough to dismiss them all. I don't think they're all true in the sense that a 21-inch femur bone at the time was considered 1/4 of the height of the body. So that creates a 7-footer from a 6-footer. So it's inaccurate. But when you have a massive jaw that fits over the face, or a skull that's measured at 36 inches in diameter, or you have a 28, 29-inch femur, you're talking about 8 and 9 foot individuals. Just like the early explorers encountered when they showed up. They all talk about giant native chiefs, from John Smith to John Lawson to Coronado, Magellan, from Patagonia to Virginia. This is the Pinson Mound site in Tennessee. 72-foot Saul's Mound is the middle of it. And some researchers believe it was actually the center of a 1,000-acre medicine wheel. So we have a lot of astronomical alignments and sophistication. These aren't just like burial mounds of the dead. At Cahokia in Collinsville, Illinois, we have a structure that was built roughly around 1200 AD, and it was a massive complex. 100-foot high, 14-acre base, which is 1 acre larger than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It took 22 million cubic feet of soil to build the structure. There was a massive temple on top to the great sun, an enlightened master who lived there around 1200 AD. And they had a prosperous community. 20 to 50,000 people lived at this site. And here's a reconstruction of it. It looks very Mesoamerican. In fact, a lot of the mound builder structures do. There was some belief that there was a connection with Mesoamerica, and there was influences back and forth. I mean, essentially, they just had to cross the Rio Grande River to communicate, with the Olmecs and the Maya. There's a ball field, there's astronomical alignments, a wood henge, and it shows you what was going on in ancient America, a far cry from disorganized and unsophisticated. Right there is the astronomical alignment I was talking about, or the astronomical calendar. This actually, it looks a lot like Teotihuacan does Cahokia, except built with earth rather than stone, because that was the material that the natives had to work with. So we have the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, and the serpent belief, the serpent religion is everywhere to be found around the planet, and native peoples have a lot of the same beliefs about the past, about the serpent culture, about ancient androgyny, a lot of the things you find in the Holy Land or in the South America, these kind of strange ideas of floods and civilizers who showed up after the flood, if you will. And you find in the mound cultures a real level of sophistication, a spiritual sophistication, and an astronomical and geometrical sophistication. Right here, the equinox and summer solstice, sunrise and sunsets are cataloged in this great earthwork. At Newark, Ohio, it's one of my favorite sites, you have a circle and octagon that is linking to another circle and octagon 55 miles away in Chillicothe. And it was believed there was a great road, a great Hopewell Road, that was, I think, 19 feet wide, several feet high, that went on like a processional way for 55 miles to get to another site. And from this place, you could understand and predict eclipses. The natives understood the 18.61 metonic cycle of the moon. And in the 1980s, two academics from Earlham College in Indiana, Hively and Horn, they went to this site basically to debunk the idea that there were any alignments here. Just like people debunked the idea that Stonehenge held any astronomical knowledge. In fact, you go back in the 70s or 60s, or maybe even the 80s, just these ideas were considered outrageous or pseudoscience, like you get a tinfoil hat on if you suggest that ancient peoples aligned to celestial events. So what they found was it was actually a lunar calendar that could predict eclipses and understood the metonic cycle of the moon. And here is that long processional way that I talked about. So ancient Ohio and the entire Ohio River Valley was basically like a blackboard of college geometry with these incredible geometric forms everywhere. Here's an aerial shot of Newark earthworks. Very precise, and a lot of intent behind the geometry and mathematics at these sites. And there are a number of these. A lot of them were destroyed, unfortunately, but they were surveyed by Squire and Davis of the Smithsonian. And this basically is a proof of how wrong the early racist leaders of our society were about Native people. And I can't stress that enough, because not only did we, dismiss and denigrate these people and their culture, we didn't listen to any of their wisdom. We didn't sit with the leaders and the wisdom keepers and figure out, what was going on in this country and how long did people live here. And they were telling a completely different story. And at the time, like the Dr. Hrdlichka from the Smithsonian, he believed that there were only people in the Americas that went back 2000 BC. And a lot of these hyper-isolationist theories of the early scientists have been proven wrong and proven wrong. And theories that have been the gold standard of archaeology and anthropology continue to be proven wrong. I ask, what else do we have wrong? What did we get wrong? So, Old Royal Tomb unearthed in Ohio. There's all these reports and accounts and artifacts that tell a different story of the past with native burials. This is in Sparrow Mounds, beautiful copper work. This was a Caddo site in Oklahoma. As you see, just really beautiful and sophisticated artifacts. This is a sandstone disc found at Moundsville, Alabama, with the eye in the palm motif. That's kind of like a secret society ancient symbol that you find all around the world. A lot of the symbolism you find amongst the mound builders, you find in cultures around the world. And I'm a believer of, like many other researchers, there was a lost continent, frankly. And it's considered, a hugely controversial idea, but I see that all these ancient peoples are sharing the same iconography, the same wisdom, the same techniques in burials, and I see a different picture, and I'm open to this idea being true. There's a steatite panther that was found in Ohio. I went to Mound City, a Hopewell site, and they had this beautiful display of all these pipes. They look like they were just turned on a machine. Possums and beavers and wildcats, and the natives like to smoke, that's for sure. And at one site, the original Hopewell site that Warren K. Moorhead unearthed, he found artifacts from all around the country, from the Gulf of Mexico, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, silver from Canada. There were massive trade routes all around the United States. A sophisticated trade network existed. So for me, I studied the mound builders, and it brought me into this idea of giants, if you will, because if our modern science could be so wrong about a people and so wrong about the past, maybe these legends and tales and religious documents that speak about giant humans, that maybe there's something to it. So it started for me, once again, reading through these old town and county histories. And the first account I ran into was by the respected George Sheldon. He was an amateur archaeologist. He was the president of the museum in Deerfield, Mass., a very prestigious prep school that exists there now. And what I found was, on page 78 of his 1895 History of Deerfield, one of these skeletons was described to me by Henry Mather, who saw it, as being of monstrous size, the head as big as a peck basket, with double teeth all around. The skeleton was examined by Stephen W. Williams, who said the owner must have been nearly 8 feet high. Now, I investigated this further. Stephen Williams was from a long line of doctors. He taught anatomy at Berkshire College. Sheldon was highly respected, and I'm reading double teeth all around, double rows of teeth. That just struck me so funny. It's just like, that's a very odd thing to say. What does it even mean? So before I learned about the wisdom of checking Google books and Google documents, I got a boatload of old town and county histories and literally read through tens of thousands of pages of New England town and county histories before I wised up. But what I found was very interesting. In all these towns in Massachusetts, like the town history of Middleborough, a few years ago when the highway was straightened and repaired, remains were found. When his skeleton was measured by Dr. Morrill, Robinson, and others, it was found to have double row of teeth in each jaw. The height must have been 7'8". It continues, the history of Rockingham. When the earth was removed from the top of the ledges east of the falls, a remarkable human skeleton was found. The jawbone was of such size that a man could easily slip it over his face, and the teeth, which were all double, were perfect. Now, the jawbone over the face is another thing I'll mention again. My co-author and I, Hugh Newman, have found dozens and dozens of accounts all around the country where the towns are buzz. They got the 8.5-foot skeleton wired together. The jawbone fits over the face of the largest man in town over and over. And to me, it's a real proof that there's something to the story here. You don't just conjure this up. You don't just make up this idea of double rows of teeth. Oh, this will be a great hoax. It's a time of inefficient communication. So as a historical detective, it just doesn't ring true that this is some hoax or coincidence. This account here is interesting. The skull on the right was unearthed in a WPA Works Project Administration project by William Duffin, the archaeologist in Texas, the Moorhiss Mound. Here he is here. He passed away a couple of years ago at like 105. I was trying to interview him at the time. But the point is that the skull, while within normal range, indicates, like that there seem to be enormous native people out of normal, statistical ranges. This is an interesting account. The Maryland Academy of Science skeleton measured 8 feet. About 7 years ago, the skeleton of an Indian in a splendid state of preservation was found along that bay that I'm not going to try to pronounce. The remains were discovered by John Widgeon, a naturalist. He was also recently discovered another fine specimen. One of these measured 7.5 feet and the other 8 feet. I spoke with the head of records at the Maryland Academy of Science, the oldest scientific institution in the country. I think it was founded in 1787 or 97. She said, the report says that Widgeon wired together these skeletons at their Franklin Street office. They were on display. She said, I know Widgeon, I know this office you're talking about. I'm digitizing the records and I can find no mention of the skeleton whatsoever. Because for me, it's like, okay, if all these skeletons are 5'7", like all the professionals tell us, here's a great example. 7.5, 8 foot tall, thigh bones as thick as a horse. They got all these vast measurements associated with these accounts. And there's not a whisper of it. And she wrote this long letter to me like, I don't know what to make of it. It's just, this gets dismissed as a joke or a fantasy. And this is the head of records. I found it very interesting. And here's John Widgeon. He was well respected. He became a Baptist minister. He was born into slavery in 1854. He became this well-respected naturalist. And I can't find a whiff of the skeletons other than a bunch of accounts talking about the president of the Maryland Academy of Sciences and Widgeon and the wiring together of the skeletons. Like, how the fuck do you wire together a 5'6" skeleton and make it 8 foot tall? Especially like for them, That's the kind of thing that really just gets my interest or gets me irritated. All the early explorers encountered giant native chiefs from Virginia to Patagonia to Florida, all around our country. From Magellan, Coronado, DeSoto, John Smith, everyone you can name encountered and chronicled enormous giant people. And these are explorers who were trained in the art of observation. Now the narrative is, the Spanish are 5'2", and the natives are probably 5'7", and they look like giants. It's a really idiotic explanation here because they clearly talk about over 7 foot tall, over 8 foot tall, on his knees, this giant towered over all our men, things like that. So here we go with DeSoto. His private secretary wrote, the new lands they explored were ruled by the giant Native American chief Tuscaloosa. This is in Alabama. Ron Hill writes, seeing him, we paused dumb with amazement. For though but a youth, he towered on high, a great-limbed giant. Heads of the tallest men reached only to his breast. Now him and his father, Tuscaloosa, were considered well over 7 foot tall. In Patagonia, Magellan, Drake, you have all these accounts of enormous skeletons. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. you know, I haven't found any evidence of 9 and 10 foot skeletons there or peoples there. But as the time went on, you had more, you know, of these accounts of 6.5, 7 foot tall people who lived there that represent an anthropological mystery, a tribe of people. This is Cook in the late 1890s who wrote about and lived with the Ona people in Patagonia. So he wrote this in this interview. He claimed the Ona tribe he met in 1897 were from 6 to 7.5 feet tall, wore animal skins, had horse endurance and bull strength, and lived in simple wigwam huts made of the tree branches. And a lot of these accounts are like that, like these native people were enormous and like built like linebackers and had incredible strength and stamina. Now what happened here was the English obliterated the Ona tribe and killed them off, much like happened with a lot of the native tribes in North and South America. We lost this, you know, look back into the past by the destruction of these native peoples. But Cook took pictures like this 6'6" Ona woman, the 7'4" Ona chief. In fact, he saw a 7'6" man he measured as well. So you have a huge race of people living in Patagonia up until the late 1890s. This is kind of freaky, but I got to put it in here. James Norris sent me this. His great-grandfather claimed to have unearthed this in Gage, Nebraska, and took it and got a portrait of it with his friend. He said, Norris told me that William Norris on the right was 6 foot tall, that they unearthed this 9 foot mummy. I know you've seen fake mummies on the internet or whatever, but it's got like this whole, I got to still have a professional look at it and see if it makes any sense, but they claim, the family claims that it was a real find. In fact, Hugh and I uncovered a 9 foot tall mummy account from Nebraska as well. So I'm just throwing that out there because it's kind of interesting and somebody sent it my way. So there's a lot of turmoil in human origins now. Hobbits were found, Denisovans were found. Is it out of Asia or is it out of Africa? Is it multi-regionalism? You know, human origins, where the hell did we come from? Everything is being broken down, and I would advocate a new look from a more oral tradition-oriented standpoint. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I'm going to keep running my mouth. In fact, scientists recently found Denisovans, human cousins who interbred with Neanderthals and humans and died out about 40,000 years ago. And here is a Denisovan tooth, absolutely huge. No long bones have been found yet, but it's looking more and more like these Denisovans who interbred with Homo sapiens could have been absolutely enormous. And another interesting fact is, not only were they enormous, they were more sophisticated than Homo sapiens 65,000 years ago. This Denisovan bracelet that was found of green chlorite is this stunning work. And there's sewing needles and other things that were found. And I think like drawing chalk was just found. But Denisovans were more sophisticated than humans 65,000 years ago, which is another curveball that couldn't have been imagined of, you know, a couple of years ago. So when I started this investigation, one of the arguments that was used to like ridicule and dismiss the whole idea was science could never miss a lost race of people, of hominids, and certainly not a giant race. But science, in fact, did miss a lost race of people. They were the Denisovans, and there's another lost race, a mystery group that hasn't been identified yet, and we only know them from the genetic fingerprint. But Denisovans showed up on the scene now. It's a whole different paradigm, and they might indeed be giant, and they were very sophisticated. So, you know, I'm not using this to like, oh, I got all the answers and I'm right. It's more like, you know, pull your head out of your ass and like be more open-minded about these things. And you know, I would say to skeptics, just stop trying to prove you're right at every turn and just like, let science decide. Let's be more open-minded about these things because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I was like naive when I got into this. I just like sharing things with people, or coaching kids, or, you know, like writing, you know, papers about economics or you know, interventions with childhood illnesses. You know, I have a history of spending time in the pursuit of trying to like investigate interesting and new ways to look at things. But when I stumbled across this, you know, there's nothing but like derision and ridicule, and I feel like, whoa, you know, where did this come from? And it shows how like toxic the environment is in human origins, in archaeology, anthropology. It's like politics and religion. And, I really don't want any part of that. I just want to make this case and share what I think is interesting information with people. I'd like to speak to a strange aspect of the giant phenomena, a very specific notation that is reported in the Bible and other esoteric documents of 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now, this is a rare genetic condition that exists in some humans, but it is portrayed as supernatural, divine, or malevolent in sources all around the planet. And I'm going to dig deep into this mystery, a mystery that you'll see that many academics have independently dove into and are basically asking questions about. I think it's a good example that this mystery is worthy of further investigation. Now, I'll let the audience make what they will of the evidence, but I feel personally this shows disconnected cultures talking about the same strange and specific things that really make a compelling case that there's something to the story. So I have been studying this giant phenomena for about 2 decades now and have pieced together my work in a book with my co-author Hugh Newman. I'm going to start today with a biblical quote, Samuel 21:20. "And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant." So it's specifically noted that this giant had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And you also have at the Library of Ashburnabal in Iraq, modern day Iraq, these ancient texts that were portraying a story of human origins. And one of the tablets talks about polydactylism. In fact, the first mention of polydactyl in written form is found in Summa Ibzu, an Assyrian compendium of 24 tablets with approximately 2,800 tetralogical omens. Most of the tablets were found in the Ashburnabal Library in Nineveh. And here I am at the British Museum with some of these cuneiform texts. Its 3rd and 4th tablets contain a total of 15 omens pertaining to polydactyl, 6 fingers on one hand and 6 fingers on both hands, 6 toes on one foot and bilaterally, as well as 6 digits on both hands and feet. It basically tells you what each means. One is a positive omen, one is a negative if you have a child that's born with one or the other. So in the academic paper, Polydactyl and Development, Inheritance, and Evolution, the authors point out the following. Cuneiform texts on polydactyl, votive child foot with 6 toes from Sumer, 26th century BC. And the inscription says, "What am I to do for my child with 6 toes?" Here is the votive with 6 toes, and here is the inscription that describes the condition and what the omen means. We also have this strange being in medieval times with 9 toes. So it's in the Arnstein Bible of a polydactylous man exhibiting 9 toes on each foot. Here is a newspaper clipping from the 60s, and you see just incredible amount of digits. A rare case of cross-polydactyl in humans combined preaxially and postaxially asymmetrical polydactyl with 6 complete fingers, as well as an extended thumb on the right hand, plus 7 complete fingers on the left hand, and 7 toes on each foot, total of 27 digits. And, is this just a genetic fluke that keeps reemerging in humans because it's associated, once again, with the divine and the supernatural? Or is it an inheritance from a parent race that is sometimes associated as giant or having multiple digits? That is sometimes the esoteric viewpoint. And the great sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, actually, I went through all his readings, 25,000 readings, 14 million words cataloged at the Virginia Beach Library. And I found this account where Cayce describes Mu Zuin, who traveled to the Gobi Desert from the lost Pacific continent of Lemuria in 9026 BC as being 6 foot tall, blue-eyed, hair dark gold, hands 6-fingered. He's not portrayed as a giant, but in this area of the Gobi Desert, he is portrayed as having 6 fingers and blonde hair and blue eyes, which is unique to the area. And here's the Gobi Desert region. We also find Pliny the Elder mentioned the encounter between the Romans and the Seres at Taprobane, who were the Chinese. They exceeded the ordinary human height, had flaxen hair and blue eyes, and made an uncouth sort of noise by way of talking. So blonde hair and blue-eyed is not what we think of as Chinese people. And in fact, the Tarim Basin mummies were found several years ago, which were, I think, around 2,000 or 3,000 BC was when they were when these people lived, and they had red hair, blue eyes, and blonde hair, and their height was between 6 feet and 6 feet 6 inches tall. So Casey has these ideas about Atlantis existing in the middle of the Atlantic, Lemuria being a lost continent in the Pacific. But when you go through his readings, there's always some corroborative evidence. You know, it seems totally off the wall when you hear his stuff. But then you have ideas and evidence like this that come forward that, like, maybe there were different peoples living in the region that tell a different story of our past. So 6 fingers and 6 toes is found at different sites in the American Southwest. This is Newspaper Rock at Utah, an ancient petroglyph site. And you find many hands and feet with 6 fingers and 6 toes here, including these 6-toed petroglyphs. This one's particularly interesting. Look at how big this one is, and it has 6 toes. So it's portrayed specifically and specifically noted in this ancient rock art. This is also a McCornell Ranch in Utah. Look at the giant feet and look at the hands, 6 toes on each. A recent National Geographic article was called "Extra Fingers and Toes Were Revered in Ancient Culture." The Pueblo people of Chaco Canyon decorated their great houses with 6-toed footprints and sandal-shaped art. Here's one of the kivas at Chaco Canyon. In fact, in room 30 at Pueblo Bonito, they found a skeleton of a foot that had 6 toes on it. And here on the wall at Pueblo Bonito, you find these 3 large footprints with 6 toes each. What you can't see over here is a normal-sized 5-toe footprint that is much smaller. So, initially intrigued by the divine powers attributed to the polydactyls among the Maya, researchers led by anthropologist Patricia Crown of the University of New Mexico conducted a comprehensive view of evidence for the condition of the canyon's sacred Pueblo Bonito site. They found this cast of a 6-toed individual, and basically the conclusion is that there was special burials and just a reverence for these people who had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And we find this in Colorado, in eastern Oklahoma. The 6-toed petroglyph is much larger than the others. This is recently sent to me by somebody who was hiking in a canyon in Utah. The 6-toed rock art is on the right. This is from an old geographical magazine, and it shows in Alton, Illinois, a rather large 6-toed petroglyph as compared to the 5-toed one. You find, basically all the southwestern states have this rock art where there's 6 toes and 6 fingers portrayed. Here again is another one with 7 and 7, and there are some of those as well. This is in Utah. This is in Moab. This is in New Mexico. Yes, Kitty. My son must have thrown that in there. This is in Texas, actually. And at this site, there is this giant 5-toed footprint. It doesn't have 6 toes, but on the Park Service website, it says this: a large foot, often with 6 toes, is a common symbol depicted in petroglyphs and pictographs. What do you think this foot could mean? So that's what it says. You know, these professionals are asking this question. So why is it portrayed as particularly large? And then it seems to line up with the biblical passage about giants. This is from the Historical Collections of Georgia. It's from Doc Stevenson, and this is a series of rock art impressions he found. They comprise human feet from those 4 inches in length to those of great warriors, which measure 17.5 inches in length and 7 3/4 in breadth across the toes. What is a little curious, all the human feet are natural except this, which has 6 toes, proving him to have been a descendant of Titan. Another isolated example of a huge foot with 6 toes, and that's right in the middle at Track Rock Boulder right there. So in Morse's Geology in 1838, we have this account. In the state of Tennessee, 2 miles south of Brasstown on Enchanted Mountain, which is at the headwaters of the Tennessee River, are found impressed in the surface of the solid rock a great number of tracks. The human tracks are remarkable for uniformly having 6 toes each. One of these tracks is distinguished from the rest by its monstrousness, being of no less than 16 inches in length. Once again, unusually large footprint associated with this idea of 6 fingers and 6 toes. I've been looking for this site around Brasstown Bald and Enchanted Mountain. It hasn't been refound since 1838, but it's another site in these set of states around North Carolina, Tennessee, that have this representation of 6 fingers and toes. So Mooney was a researcher at the Smithsonian, and he recorded the Cherokee legend of Judaculla Rock. A legend describes the giant leaped down off his mountain to a creek below where he scratched the rock with his 7-fingered hands. And here is a representation of his 7-fingered hand right there. And the ancient belief of the Cherokee is that there was a giant who lived in the area with 7 fingers. So at Camp Crittenden in Arizona, we have this account from 1891. While digging for a commercial building, a giant stone coffin was uncovered. The project manager didn't want to open it until an expert was called in to examine the strange find. When finally opened, a granite case was found inside, which appeared to have held a body of a man at least 12 feet tall. A carving on the casing pointed to the fact that he had 6 toes and fingers. In Baja California, at the Coso site, we also have 6 fingers and 6 toes represented, but in a particularly interesting way. There was an ancient native tradition that there was a race of giants with 6 fingers and 6 toes that the peoples of the time, the indigenous peoples, warred with. And you'll see right here, this Joker-like being has 6 toes on his right hand. But also we have this 6-toed being at war with these 5-toed beings. And right here, 6 fingers, and he is littered with arrows. And this one right here, you'll see 6 fingers, and whoever this ancient person is, he is tuned up with a bunch of arrows, just trying to piece together if this ancient idea of a war between the 2 races occurred. So all around the world, you find the same phenomena. In a series of caves in China, we have the Buddha represented with 6 fingers on each of his hands. Now, once again, this idea of polydactylism is associated with malevolence and benevolence, with the divine and the supernatural. And the Buddha is represented with 6 fingers right here. And this is an interesting account from Madrid. There is one place in the world where the bulk of the population has 6 fingers on each hand, and some residents have 7. Very few have 5. The place is the tiny village of Cervera de Buitrago in an isolated section of the Madrid province. Citizens there are so accustomed to extra fingers that they regard a 5-fingered hand as normal. Now this, much like the Pueblo area in the southwest, there is a incidence of polydactylism that is much higher than the normal rate in the regular human population. The question is, was there an influx of ancient people to these areas and interbreeding that occurred that is displayed in the continued prevalence of polydactylism at this point? It seems to be the case. There's certainly a much higher prevalence in the American Southwest and it's been noted in academic papers. Here you have a burial shroud from 100 AD, and the woman here has 6 toes on each foot, 12 in all. This is an ancient site of Ayin Ghazal, and what you're going to see is some of the oldest statues in the world are associated or they display polydactylism and androgyny, another strange topic that I'll get into at length in other talks. But right now I wanted to focus on this ancient settlement of Ayin Ghazal. So it first appeared in the MPPNB, which is the middle pre-pottery Neolithic B phase, and it's split into 2 phases. One starts in 10,300 before present and ends in 9950, while phase 2 ends in 9550 before present. So we have these super ancient statues at Ayin Ghazal, and I'll show you at Jericho as well, that have 6 fingers and or 6 toes. So in the Israeli Exploration Journal, the first Adam androgyny in the Ayin Ghazal bust, Ered Ziffer basically points to these statues as this parent race of humans. Now here is the foot with 6 toes from Ayin Ghazal, and this is what the sober academic says about these statues. It is proposed that the Ayin Ghazal statues represented deities. The polydactylism, a rare genetic syndrome, of the statues is viewed as a divine attribute, and based on cuneiform literature, identifies the 2-headed busts as the likes of the gods Marduk and Ishtar. So Richard Barnett, his wife posthumously published his paper about polydactylism in the ancient world, and he explained at Ayin Ghazal the statues are a mark of a supernatural entity such as the biblical Rephaim, the race of giants. So this is what Ered Ziffer, the Israeli archaeologist, says. Drawing on Rolfson's interpretation, which understands the Ayin Ghazal statues as ancestral figures instrumental in shaping the historical identity of their makers, I would like to suggest that these statues represented mythical ancestors from the dawn of mankind, and that the 2-headed busts among them represent the first human being, the androgynous prototype of humanity that had 6 fingers and 6 toes. So you have this idea being contemplated by academics. So here is the site of Jericho right here. And this is a pre-pottery Neolithic B site. So it's 10,700 to 8,000 years old. And once again, you have a 6-toed statue found at this site. And here's the ancient Tower of Jericho. And here it is right here, a representation of it. So you're finding that this polydactylism is represented in some of the oldest statues on the planet. At the Iron Age site of Tel Demii, it's at a Air Force base in Jordan. It's a protected site. And what they found here at this site was these 2 anthropomorphic statues that have 6, they're androgynous, and they have 6 fingers apiece. So another example of polydactylism in the ancient world. In Jordan, we also have a series of really superb dolmens that you find in the Caucasus and the British Isles and everywhere else. So it's attributed to these ancient builders, and were they associated with this lost race we're talking about, these supernatural beings. At Hamid Gadar in Israel, Jordan border, there's also this find from the Israeli Exploration Society Journal. The enormous right foot and the left hand depicted on the marble slabs each have 6 digits. Then we go over to Paracas and Peru, where we have elongated skulls. But we also have this big pot that represents polydactylism in the hands. Each one clearly has 6 fingers, and the feet, strangely, just have 5 toes each. So this is another example in a different part of the world. And a new study out last year actually said the following: this prehistoric polydactylism, biological evidence and rock art representation from the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. So this study, and here's the authors, went in Chile and Argentina and found a vast amount of sites with 6 fingers and 6 toes carved everywhere. You'll see some of the examples right there. This is the region. See all the sites that are numbered had rock art with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Here's some more of the representations of what we're talking about. So, moreover, this is quoted from the academic paper. Moreover, the broad dispersion of hands and feet and rock art images with polydactyl in Chile and Argentina could suggest that it was more frequent than currently documented in the bioarchaeological record. Now, I don't know if that is true or it's just the case that this attribute was so thought of as divine and supernatural that it was portrayed over and over again. But it's nice to see academics looking at this problem. Templo Mayor in Mexico City is an Aztec site. Here are the ruins of it right here. This is what it looked like in its heyday at Tenochtitlan. The entire area was surrounded by lakes Oaxaca. I'm sorry. The entire area was surrounded by a great lake, and this is what the reconstruction looked like at the time. So here you have the lake all around the old city, and this is what modern-day Mexico City, where it lies today. So right when you go in the temple, there are 2 murals of deities, and they both have 6 toes on each foot, oddly enough. So I took pictures of each of these, and I just found it really astonishing that right in the museum, you have once again, you have deities associated with this genetic condition, which is associated with giants. So there's another Aztec site right here with 6 fingers. And here is the Palenque ruins in Mexico. Here I am visiting a couple of years ago on a tour, and all around the site, this is from a Maya polydactylism academic paper, you find 6 fingers and 6 toes specifically noted. And you go over to Teotihuacan, and you find the same thing. In Mesoamerica, human representations with 6-digit hands and feet are identified in lithic sculptures from Palenque, clay model figures from Teotihuacan, and Zapoteca ceramics. So these beings or these entities are often displayed with 6 fingers and 6 toes. And here I am, I think with the same shirt, in an Olmec museum, and both those beings, these deities, have 6 fingers on their hands. You see right there. And oftentimes I'll travel to museums and I'll go all around the world, and I'll find examples of this on Philistine coffins or in Sumerian places and different museums that have never been noted before. Like this androgynous being, this deity on the right from Ecuador, has 6 fingers clearly on the hands. Now this one has 5. This isn't like, oh, the artist screwed up. This is, like clearly being represented here. In Tulum, and there's a really beautiful place in Mexico, an ancient temple site, a Mayan temple site, you have the Temple of Frescoes. And in the backside of this temple, you have a 7-fingered painting. And this is an Etruscan fresco, and this deity, this is like a supernatural god who has to put on some pants, but it is noted in the academic journal that he has 6 fingers, once again, on each hand. And at the Getty Museum, you have this fertility goddess who, in this well-worn limestone representation of this ancient being, has 6 toes on each foot. Now, women would hold this fertility goddess and pray to this ancestral deity to have, a benevolent birth. And you're going to ask, why is this being portrayed with 6 toes, this ancestor deity that is written about in academic papers and is super, super ancient? So the fertility goddess with 6 toes, implying superhuman qualities from southwestern Cyprus, goes back to a period of 3000 to 2500 BC. So these super ancient sites, these super ancient statues are all representing polydactylism. This is in Marlik, Iran. I believe it's 1900 BC, if I'm not mistaken, these ancient statues. Clearly 6 toes on every foot right here. And here's another one. 6 toes on every foot. And then you go over to Thailand, and at this rock shelter, this super ancient site, you find a hand that has 5 fingers right next to a 6-fingered hand in an ancient cave site in Thailand on the other side of the world. Now, this idea of extra fingers and toes goes into mythology. Cuchulainn is a member of the Tuatha De Danann who showed up on the coast of Ireland. Some think, well, there are these stories that go back and talk about invasions before and after the Great Flood. And Cuchulainn was considered this divine, benevolent god, if you will. And he is specifically noted, I'll give this account here, each foot had 7 toes and each hand 7 fingers, the nails with the grip of a hawk's claw or a griffin's clench. So this is from this particular mythological academic paper, but you can go to Wikipedia to find out about Cuchulainn having 7 fingers on each hand. And what's notable about him is he was called the foam of the sea and showed up in metal craft along with the Tuatha De Danann, these mythical beings from a lost world who had advanced technology. And you go on the other side of the world to Lake Titicaca, where Viracocha emerged from the lake on a raft of serpents, the foam of the sea he was called, and he is portrayed with 6 fingers and 6 toes oftentimes as well. So you have these ancient beings from a lost world who show up, restart civilization, have supernatural abilities, and then there are specific notations about their abilities, the supernatural traits, and their polydactylism. This is from, it was found in 1938 by German archaeologists in Tibet. You see the backwards swastika, and the Buddha-like figure here has 6 fingers on his hands. This statue was made from axatite, meteoric iron, and you'll see he is associated with 6 fingers once again. So this is another example from Iran of 6 fingers on each hand. I'm just showing these examples all around the world to really make this case that it's not just a coincidence. So from 1000 to 650 BC, we have that sculpture there. This is the Irish giant from Strand magazine in 1895. I can't attest to the, reality of this any more than anybody else because it doesn't exist anymore. But what I can tell you is this giant was on display. It was sent around to carnivals and people paid to see it at the time in the late 1800s. But it had 6 toes on its right foot and was 12 feet tall. Here's an Egyptian coffin lid, clearly 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 fingers. Here in the Medical Journal of Malta, you have this account. Congenital malformations, a historical perspective. Polydactyl is evident in a handprint described from the Hal Saflini hypogeum in Malta. So you have these ancient ruins all around Malta, and there is a 6-fingered handprint also on a wall here at the hypogeum. I spoke to the curator there, and they said they were aware that it's reported, but they've been unable to find where the handprint is now. So I'd like to go in there with some kind of, you got to get special permission, but some kind of technology to see if we can, refine this handprint. But once again, this land, this area that's associated with giants, Malta, just like Sicily and Sardinia, has 6 fingers and 6 toes associated with it. And also at the other temple of Hagar Kim, you have congenital malformations. You have a statuette that had 6 fingers associated with it. Here's a picture of the temple, super ancient temple. Before Göbekli Tepe was found in Malta, these were considered the world's oldest temples. And here are the statues I'm talking about. And we go over to Australia and we find, once again, these legends of giants, guardian spirits, androgynous beings. The ancient Australian Aborigines have an androgynous god as a creator god, just like the Zuni and native tribes do, or the beings Oannes and that show up in Samaria, and the other beings there, fish gods, they're considered androgynous. And even Viracocha in South America is known to be androgynous. Now, he is represented as male, but these beings are always portrayed as sexless beings who create humanity from the earth, in supernatural fashion. So once again, this idea is shared all around the planet. So you have this six-fingered guardian spirit right here. And this particular piece of rock art I've been unable to find, but I'll read it right here from 1959. For instance, a rock drawing found in New South Wales, Australia, shows a double-headed human male figure, 9 feet 6 inches long, with 6 fingers on the right hand. And I will say that just like the Ayin Ghazal statues, there are a lot of academics who point to androgyny being portrayed as a two-headed statue, as a male and a female. So you find this verified by academics, and it's all around the world. And this androgynous spirit being is 9'6" with 6 fingers on his right hand. And for me, I just try to I find a real interest in piecing together all this ancient rock art, myths and legends, and esoteric teachings, and try to make a case that this seems well beyond coincidence. You could say, I don't know what the hell you could say about it, frankly, how you could really describe what is going on all around the planet with the myths and legends of giants, the association with polydactylism, and then the proof right in front over and over again. This isn't always just normal-sized beings. Often they're portrayed as giant, these cultures that had no connection with each other. So that's what kind of piques my interest in this matter. So here's another being. The one on the right, left has 5. This guy has 6 on each hand. This is a giant spirit being from Australia as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot. That is pretty specific. And our thoughts about Australia and the peopling of Australia are changing rapidly these days too. I'll read this account here that just came out. 2018, Aboriginal settlement in Australia was no accident. Aboriginal settlement in Australia was no accident twice. Purposeful voyaging on this scale relied on advanced cognitive, linguistic, symbolic, and technical capabilities. It would have required construction of watercraft and well-developed navigation technology, as well as planning and information sharing. Now, there was a multidisciplinary team of scientists that basically took on the study of how people populated ancient Australia. And oftentimes, to fit theories that don't work, scientists and academics come up with kind of ridiculous notions like, these people must have been sent to this place after a flood. There was a hurricane and they were on a raft of reeds, and that's how they got to this island, and things like that. Instead of maybe these ancient people had the ability to navigate. So you see a lot of confirmation bias in the alternative area and in modern day science, where I have this theory and let's ram the square peg in the round hole. But as many researchers have been suggesting, Australia looks like it was founded earlier by a much more sophisticated people. So here again we have 6 fingers on the hands of this being. I found this in the old literature from the 1800s. There were Aboriginals who came over to the mainland from an island they lived on, and they had these old drawings on bark. And one of the drawings was this strange being that has 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. This divine and supernatural being, this isolated race before they died out, basically portrayed, part of the mythology of the creation on this bark parchment, and it was recorded in an old academic paper. So this is the kind of thing that, you piece it all together and it's like, whoa, and if you just read it individually, you say that's interesting. And what I'm trying to do once again is make this case and portray how ubiquitous this feature is. So at Matsing in Botswana, Africa, we have the emergence place of the great god that shows up, and he has 6 toes. the footprints of Lanao Laga Kwalbe is said to have belonged to an enormous man who, like Matt Sang is the original god, lived thousands of years ago. He was a six-toed individual with massive feet. The footprint of one of these large feet was imprinted on a rock outside of Acadia. So here's the impression. The site was found in the 70s and it's being preserved now in Botswana. But it's the place of emergence of the giant, and he has 6 toes once again. And here's another example of it. Here is Credo Mutwa. He is a Zulu shaman, and he has ideas about the past, about extraterrestrial influences and things like that. He's a mystic and a shaman, and he says that 6 fingers and 6 toes are the mark of the supernatural Zulu god. He independently says this in his work, in his books. In Tanzania, you have this being with 2 hands, particularly large hands that have 6 fingers on each. Now, this was brought to my attention by Michael Tellinger. I know Hugh Newman visited this site. There's this, what seems to be a giant footprint in South Africa. Now, I'm not claiming somebody stepped in the mud 200 million years ago, but maybe it is a representation by the indigenous peoples. Whatever it is, it's a giant footprint, and it actually has 6 toes. I think it's kind of quite striking to go along with the rest of the information I'm putting out there. So, all around French Polynesia and the Pacific, you find the same phenomena. You find statues, these created gods, all throughout the Pacific Islands, just like this one here. So I think outside it's from the Austral Islands and outside a museum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-fingered gods. Terry Dahl is an explorer, he's a Norwegian like Thor Heyerdahl. I think he lives in Australia now. And he was on our show, Search for the Lost Giants, and I'm friends with Terry. And he said what got him interested was in giants was he would travel to all these Pacific Islands. All these statues had 6 fingers and 6 toes. They were associated with giants. And all the local people told him the legends of the giants inhabiting these islands. Like in Kiribati, you have the footprints of Tarawa. And the anthropologist I.G. Turbert says the following: the short account is a factual report without any personal comments or interpretations of the position of the 2 series of footprints appearing on Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands, as shown to me and explained by the old men of Tarawa. Here's a picture of the site. Here is one of the giant footprints right there. You see 6 toes. There it is right there. A little tough to see. The book describes in detail the evidence for the prehistoric giants and the record of the gigantic footprints. Here, various footprints can clearly be seen in the volcanic stone, some of them so huge as to seem impossible. Most have 6 toes on each foot. And here's one of the elders stepping into the stone right here. It's a giant footprint. This particular footprint is said to be the left foot. It sinks a good inch into the solid rock. A coral limestone has 12 toes and measured 3'9" to 4'6" from toe to heel. Its counterpart, the right foot, is reported to be near the village of Tenk and Ranga on Maina, a separate island in the Gilberts, some 20 miles to the southwest of Tarawa. So you have another footprint, the match of this 12-toed giant. Make of it what you want. I think it's, once again, pretty interesting. So in Fiji, this is from an archaeological report, you have a handprint on the cave wall that has 6 fingers. And you go over to Easter Island. Now, Georgia Lee was an archaeologist who did her thesis by spending many years on Easter Island. And she seemed to be particularly interested. She wrote The Rock Art of Easter Island. She was particularly interested in the idea of 6 fingers and 6 toes. And here's one of the figures from Ranurakuru on the island, and she displays it there. But she also points out that the mysterious Birdman has 6 fingers here. And right here, the arrow, this is from the Peabody Museum. It was taken from Easter Island, and Georgia Lee, the archaeologist, points out it has 6 toes as well. And we all know about the famous statues And what is lesser known is some really amazing megalithic work there that looks like it was of the same style and vintage as what you find in Peru. So in Pohnpei, you have more of these megalithic buildings. I point out these structures because there is a megalithic Pacific, basically. There are structures around the Pacific Islands that some researchers think are leftovers from a lost continent, from a Lemuria, if you will. And this is on Nan Madol. And here is Tonga right here. And here is the Trilithon of Tonga, just really astonishing megalithic feat. And these islands, these isolated islands, are littered with this kind of megalithic building. At the Altamira Cave in Spain, you have super ancient rock carvings. They could be up to 30,000 years old. And right here you have a spirit being with 7 fingers. And here you have a hybrid antelope, gazelle, human. Sometimes shamans will portray like this, supernaturally, and he clearly has 6 fingers. And once again, you have this hybrid being. Sorry, I looked for the original in the Stockholm Museum. It's in the back room, so I have to go with this picture of it. But this, in the academic paper, it says this Greek figure, this hybrid figure, has a left hand, a huge left hand that has 6 fingers on it. And these winged siren hybrid beings are found from Anatolia to Greece in, I think, around 1500 to 2000 BC. They're cauldron holders, and they're often portrayed with 6 fingers on each hand. Now, my friend J.J. Ainsworth sent me this. This is a hybrid scorpion being, I don't even know what it is, on a man bag, and you'll see it has 6 fingers right there. So you have this representation associated with hybrids, with supernaturals, with giants, with the lost race. In fact, I'm a believer in the collective unconscious, that we're sharing one mind, as much as we probably don't like it at some point. But these ideas keep getting dredged up and looked at and represented. And there is this idea of a parent race. In fact, Anne Rice, she wrote a series where there was a parent race with 6 fingers. And I know that's fiction, but these ideas, they seem to make sense that of all I've showed you, all the divine attributes, all the statues, the fertility goddesses and the giants and the places of emergence, it seems like there is a story here. And it's even shows up in art. 6 fingers here, 6 toes on St. John the Baptist in this painting. The first Adam in the Bible was actually androgynous. The second was human. And right here, Jan van Scorel, 1540, his painting. It's well noted this has 6 fingers. It's just a tough picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So androgynous beings are also associated with this. Like at the Temple of Esna, Khnum created humans on a potter's wheel, just like Viracocha of the earth, and Fu Shui and Nuwa in China, these androgynous creator gods. And this Temple of Esna is dedicated to an androgynous god. He is known to be this androgynous being, and he is portrayed as having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fingers. And on the other side of the ocean, we have our friend Viracocha, and here's Tiwanaku. Viracocha is right here. Now, he is well known to be androgynous. Google androgyny and Viracocha, you will find the old stories. He is thought to be a giant and a survivor of a lost civilization who emerges from Lake Titicaca. So there is a vase that Maurice Cottrell wrote about in The Lost Tomb of Viracocha, and it has a bas-relief with 6 fingers, and it looks like this one here. I can't find the original. Maurice hasn't sent to me yet, but I do know that Viracocha is represented in the German museum, and he has 6 toes on his right foot, and he's basically portrayed as a hybrid being. So, what do you make of all this? What do I make of all this? I really feel like, if you're an academic, you can pick away at pieces of this, but it's tough to start talking about hybrids and gods and the supernatural and be taken seriously. So, I like to think of myself as a goodwill ambassador from the lunatic fringe, and I just try to piece together this information and tell a mythological tale about our past. And I think there's something to this. It is well beyond coincidence. That's what really gets me. I'm not, I don't have any skin in the game like, oh, I got to prove this case, or, I have to defend my position endlessly. I think any rational person strapped down to a chair and forced to listen to me talk about this for an hour will say, there's something to the story. I don't know truly what it is, but it seems like, there's something here. And like I said at the beginning, this resonates with some people, and some people just don't want any part to do with these controversial subjects. I'll just say, if you have an open-minded orientation around it, and you start looking and you start searching museums and ancient sites, you hear a different story. So I appreciate your time, and I'm glad to share this strange information with you.